Goeiedag, mijn naam is Evan, ik is immigratieprocureur hier in Amerika en ik wil je helpen om immigratiewet te verstaan. Now, I've got two things that I want to deal with today, so you got to watch the entirety of the video if you want to hear both of them, but remember to like, subscribe, share, consider becoming a channel member if you haven't. It really helps the work that I'm doing here on the channel to help get information out to Afrikaner refugees, Afrikaner asylum seekers, and to Americans here in the United States concerning the plight of the Afrikaner and other ethnic minorities binnen South Africa. Now, two things that I want to discuss. One kind of comes off the cusp of the last video where I talked about the Afrikaner refugee limits and things like that and everything you've seen that's popped up in the news. And I wanted to make this clear that you really have to be careful about the news and the sources that you look at, because if you read half of the articles that have been sent to me, you can clearly tell that they're left-leaning, they're biased, they hate Afrikaners, they make Afrikaners the dog whistle for white supremacy and racism and all this other sort of stuff. So yes, while there will be a cap, and this is what I said to many people, if you ever thought there wasn't going to be a cap, then you didn't actually do any research into any sort of refugee programs. Every refugee program from the United States has always had a cap, a limit on the number of refugees we're willing to take over. So that was always going to be an issue. The issue is just going to be how many, and we don't know yet. And all of those leaks and articles and things you've seen talk about Afrikaners having so-called a persecution, all this other sort of stuff. So you know that it's biased. You know that it's leaning one way, and it's meant to project that message that Afrikaners are not deserving of a refugee program and everything else that you've seen. So again, be careful of the news that you ingest, that you look at, but do know that there will be a limit on refugees, of all refugees we take in, and once we know what that number is for a fact, we'll put that out here on the channel. So there's no reason to fearmonger about it, but it is something you need to be aware of, that there will be limits on every refugee program. So as I continue to say, you know, what is the plan B? What's your other option? Should always be something that you need to consider. Now, the second part that I wanted to discuss really quickly is a lot of people have been asking for advice on their initial statements and what they write and things like that. Now, here's the thing. I'm not going to review statements. I'm not going to look over that stuff. One, because I simply just don't have the time on top of the two jobs that I already do. But also, you don't need anyone's help. If you understand what this whole program is about, you can easily articulate past persecution or the well-founded fear of future persecution. But let me see if I can help guide you through it just simply. Before you sit down to pen the 3,000-word statement or whatever it is you need for your initial screening or for USCIS or whatever the case may be, you need to just remember how the program works. And if you understand how the program works and the elements required for a refugee, it'll help you better be able to articulate it. So let's break this down, right? There are three elements that are required for someone to be a refugee when we talk about this fear, right? You have to articulate that either the government or someone the government is unable or unwilling to control is persecuting you because of an immutable characteristic, something you can't change, or something you shouldn't have to change. So we have three elements here. The first element is the government or someone the government is unable or unwilling to control. Now, by the way, you don't have to write these in order. You just have to make sure that these three elements are met. So in your narrative, you have to explain who's doing the persecuting to you. Is it the government? Is it the EFF? Is it Malema's group? Is it the actual, the government of South Africa? And you could argue in many instances, yes, you can argue the EFF. You can argue, you know, the stealing of land expropriation, all of that sort of stuff. You can argue, again, I wouldn't lead off with this because it talks to another element, but you can talk about BEE and race-based laws. All of those things are the government, right? But also people the government are unable or unwilling to control. That's where you point to the obscene high levels of crime, the inability for the police to protect and prevent murders, farm murders, that sort of stuff. But remember, a lot of these elements elide into the other. So when you talk about crime, remember you've got to actually connect it to that third element as well. So think about your first element. Who is doing the persecuting? Is it the government? Is it someone the government's unable or unwilling to control? Make sure you explain that. The second element is persecution, and we've talked about this at length. Persecution has to be more than mere discrimination or harassment. The U.S. courts have said things like the Jim Crow laws here in the United States, which would be very analogous to things you saw during apartheid. Whites only, colored only, that sort of stuff. BEE. On its face, BEE alone is not necessarily persecution. So keep that in mind. Well, this is where we play the game of where do you rank these different issues of persecution. So that alone doesn't meet the level. Persecution has been defined as extreme levels of conduct. Things that result in, for example, death or imprisonment. Things like assault, battery, rape, torture. Threats of those things as well. Remember, because you're trying to talk about the past or the well-founded fear of future persecution. So to go back up to that first element of government or someone the government's unable or willing to control, you're telling me they either did it in the past or I'm afraid of them doing it in the future. Second element, persecution. Either I did experience severe beatings, torture, imprisonment, or the threats of that, someone actually coming and threatening it to me, or I fear it for the future, which again, the threat can fall into both categories, or you can look at things that EFF and people have said, or the statistics for farmers, that sort of stuff. But the persecution has to be more than mere discrimination or harassment. So come up with that element. Break that element down. Do you fear death? Do you fear imprisonment? Do you fear batteries, assaults, tortures, rapes, that sort of horrific stuff? That's the level of persecution, right? That's the second element. The third element, and this is why sometimes it's difficult to connect if you've experienced it in the past, is it has to be because of an immutable characteristic. In this case, because you are an Afrikaner, so because of your race. So go back up to those first two elements. If you say a gang of people mercilessly beat me, okay, and the government couldn't do anything to stop them, and as you see by crime stats, they won't do anything to stop them, so you've proven the first element, that it's a group the government can't or won't control. You've proven the second element, these merciless beatings, that you face persecution. But now the third element, if you're looking at past persecution, you have to prove, or articulate rather, for refugees, that it happened to you because you were an Afrikaner. Now, this is the hardest element on the asylum side for many people to prove. But you've got to try and figure out or see if there was any way for you to articulate that it happened to you because you're an Afrikaner. Now, just because you may not be able on your face to articulate it doesn't mean don't say it, but you may be questioned about it. And you need to kind of figure out an answer, what you're going to say. Well, they may not have said, I'm beating you because you're an Afrikaner, but these crimes happen all the time. And they're directed at me, directed at Afrikaners or the minorities. So it just makes sense that this is what happened. Now, again, that's probably not a great argument, but it might be the only argument you have. But you have to connect it. That is the biggest thing that we see on the asylum side here when people talk about past persecution, is that inability to connect both the actor and the persecution to the immutable characteristic, right? That it happened to me because I'm white, because I'm an Afrikaner, because of whatever else, or whatever other immutable characteristic. So those are the three areas. Now, if you're saying future persecution, that last element of because I'm an Afrikaner, you look at things like farm murders, you look at things like kill the boar, one bullet, one farmer, one settler, whatever the chants are. So that's it. If you can just slow down, take a breath, look at those three elements, right? The first element is the actor, the government or someone the government is unable and willing to control. The second element is persecution, more than mere discrimination, harassment. Now, of course, you should include the BEE and all of the race-based laws. But again, that comes secondary to the persecution, which is more than mere discrimination and harassment. Because a lot of times, like I said, it's analogous to the United States, and things like, when you have, we talked about DEI in the past and affirmative action, all these other things that we've allowed to happen in the United States, and the Supreme Court has said is okay because it corrects past wrongs. You will get the same argument, at least from the government, if you just led with BEE or if you just led with these race-based laws. So that is discrimination or harassment as far as the courts here have been concerned. But you have so much to go off of that I wouldn't worry about it. But of course, I put that in. So then you've got that persecution level. And the last element is you have to connect it to your race. So in the past, if it happened to you, you have to say this happened because I'm an Afrikaner and be able to articulate how you can prove that. Or you say, I fear this in the future because I'm an Afrikaner, because they're directing it at me. It's not simply because South Africa is a failed state with high crime that the police and the government can't control. It's that this crime is being directed at me because I'm an Afrikaner. So hopefully this helps with, guiding you through some of those statements. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you for the next video.